The clock on the dashboard showed 11:47 a.m. as the black sedan pulled into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner. From the outside, it looked like any other small-town restaurant. Faded paint on the walls, a neon sign that flickered every few seconds, and plastic chairs on a tiny porch where locals sometimes sat to smoke and chat about the weather. David Chen stepped out of the car, adjusting his simple blue jeans and gray hoodie. Most people wouldn't recognize him dressed like this. No expensive suits, no flashy watch, no bodyguards. Just a tired-looking man in his early 40s who happened to be worth more money than most small countries. But money couldn't buy what he wanted most: to hear his son speak. "Come on, buddy," David said softly, opening the back door. 8-year-old Tommy sat in his car seat, completely focused on a small toy in his hands. He was spinning it over and over, watching the way the light caught its surface. The boy didn't look up when his father spoke. He rarely looked at anyone directly. David had learned to be patient. 3 years of doctors, specialists, and therapists had taught him that rushing Tommy never worked. Some days were better than others. Some days, Tommy would take his hand when they walked. Other days, like today, Tommy seemed lost in his own world, unreachable despite being right there. They had been coming to this diner every Tuesday for almost 6 months now. It started by accident. David's regular restaurant was closed for repairs, and this was the only place nearby. He almost left when he saw how small and crowded it was. But something about the warm smell of coffee and home-cooked food made him stay. The first visit was rough. Tommy had a meltdown when a waitress tried to give him a plastic cup instead of the paper one he expected. The woman looked confused and a little scared when Tommy started rocking back and forth, making small humming sounds that grew louder and louder. David was used to the stares, the whispered conversations, the way people suddenly found their phones very interesting when his son acted differently. But the owner of the diner, an older woman named Betty, surprised him. She calmly brought over several different types of cups and let Tommy choose. No questions, no judgment, just quiet understanding. When Tommy finally picked a white ceramic mug, she smiled and said, "Good choice. That's my favorite one too." From that day on, Betty always saved the same corner booth for them. Table number 7, away from the kitchen noise but close enough to the window so Tommy could watch the cars go by. She learned that Tommy liked his food arranged in specific ways, and that sudden loud noises made him cover his ears and shut down. David found himself looking forward to these Tuesday visits more than any business meeting or fancy dinner. Here, he wasn't the CEO of a tech company that employed thousands of people. He wasn't the guy whose phone rang every few minutes with urgent decisions that affected millions of dollars. He was just a dad having lunch with his son. Today, Tommy was having what doctors called a low-response day. He hadn't made eye contact with David all morning. Getting him dressed took 45 minutes because the blue shirt felt wrong. Then, the red shirt was too loud, and finally the green one was acceptable, but only if the tag was cut out completely. Breakfast was abandoned after Tommy decided the cereal was the wrong shape. David had canceled 2 important meetings to be here. His assistant thought he was crazy. "You could have lunch anywhere in the city," she often said. "Why drive 30 minutes to eat at a place that doesn't even have cloth napkins?" She didn't understand. In those fancy restaurants, Tommy was a problem to be managed. Waiters spoke in whispers to the manager when Tommy arranged his silverware in straight lines, or when he hummed the same 3 notes over and over. Even when they tried to be nice, David could see the relief in their eyes when they finally left. But Rosie's Diner was different. The regulars had gotten used to seeing them. Old Joe, who sat at the counter every day reading the newspaper, would nod hello. The young couple who came in on their lunch break from the hardware store across the street had stopped staring months ago. Even the truckers who stopped by for coffee and pie seemed to understand that the quiet boy in the corner booth was just part of the place. Tommy climbed into his usual spot by the window without being asked. This was progress. 6 months ago, he would only sit if David sat first and showed him exactly where to put his hands on the table. Now, Tommy had his own routine. He arranged the salt and pepper shakers so they were exactly 2 inches apart. He folded his napkin into a perfect square. He lined up the sugar packets from shortest to tallest. David watched his son's careful movements and felt the familiar ache in his chest. Tommy's world was full of patterns and rules that made sense to him but seemed impossible for everyone else to understand. David had spent countless hours reading everything he could find about autism, talking to experts, trying every therapy and treatment that showed even a tiny bit of promise. The hardest part wasn't the daily challenges or the sleepless nights when Tommy couldn't settle down. The hardest part was the silence. Tommy was smart. David could see it in the way he solved puzzles, the way he remembered exactly where everything belonged, the way he noticed details that other people missed. But Tommy had never said "Dad." He had never said "I love you" or "I'm hungry" or even "no." He communicated in his own way. A gentle touch meant yes. Pushing something away meant no. Taking David's hand and leading him somewhere meant he needed help. But David would have given everything he owned, every company, every investment, every dollar in every bank account, just to hear his son say his name. The lunch crowd was starting to fill in. Construction workers from a job site down the road took up 3 tables near the front. A mother with twin toddlers struggled to keep them in their high chairs while she looked at the menu. 2 elderly women shared a piece of apple pie and gossiped about their neighbor's new fence. Tommy seemed comfortable with the gentle buzz of conversation and clinking silverware. Sometimes loud noises bothered him, but the familiar sounds of the diner had become part of his Tuesday routine. He was still arranging and rearranging the items on the table, but David could tell he was calm. This was their time. No phones, no emails, no urgent business that couldn't wait an hour. Just a father and son sharing a meal, even if they shared it in silence. David had learned to find peace in these quiet moments. He watched Tommy's face, looking for small signs of happiness. The way his eyes crinkled slightly when something pleased him, the soft humming that meant he felt safe. A few minutes, their usual waitress would come over to take their order. Tommy always got the same thing: grilled cheese cut into triangles, fries arranged in rows of 4, and chocolate milk in the white ceramic mug. David usually ordered whatever seemed good, but he barely tasted his food. He was always too busy, watching his son, hoping for something, anything that might be a breakthrough. He had no idea that today would be different. He had no idea that in just a few minutes a young woman would walk over to their table and change everything. The familiar sound of footsteps approached their table. But something was different today. David looked up from watching Tommy arrange his sugar packets and saw a new face. Their usual waitress, Linda, wasn't working today. Instead, a young woman with kind brown eyes and a genuine smile walked toward them. "Hi there," she said softly. Not too loud, not too cheerful. Her voice had a natural warmth that didn't feel forced. "I'm Riley. Linda asked me to take extra good care of table 7 today." David felt his stomach tighten slightly. New people meant unpredictable reactions to Tommy. Some tried too hard to be friendly. Others got nervous and made mistakes. A few had even suggested that maybe Tommy would be more comfortable eating somewhere quieter, which was code for somewhere else entirely. But Riley seemed different. She didn't stare at Tommy or try to get his attention right away. Instead, she stood at a comfortable distance and waited. David had learned that rushing things with his son never worked, and somehow this young woman seemed to understand that without being told. Tommy was still focused on his sugar packets, moving them around like pieces in some invisible puzzle: 3 pink ones, 2 white ones, 1 yellow one that was slightly torn at the corner. He had arranged them in a perfect line, then changed his mind and made them into a small pyramid, then back to a line again. "He has his own way of doing things," David said quietly, the explanation he had given hundreds of times before. He was ready for the usual response: a tight smile, a nod that didn't quite reach the person's eyes, maybe a comment about how special Tommy was. Riley glanced at the sugar packet arrangement and nodded. "Looks like he's got a good system going," she said matter-of-factly. "Mind if I grab you guys some menus, or do you already know what sounds good?" David blinked in surprise. No pity, no awkward questions, no speaking about Tommy like he wasn't sitting right there. Just normal conversation. "We usually get the same thing," David said. "Grilled cheese and fries for him, cut and arranged in a specific way. Linda knows how he likes it." No problem, Riley said, pulling a small notepad from her apron pocket. Why don't you tell me exactly how, and I'll make sure the kitchen gets it right? As David explained Tommy's preferences, triangles not squares, fries in groups of 4, chocolate milk in the white ceramic mug, Riley wrote everything down carefully. She didn't act like these requests were strange or difficult. She just listened and took notes like she was memorizing an important recipe. Got it, she said when David finished. And for you? David ordered a burger without really thinking about it. He was still watching Riley, trying to figure out what made her different from everyone else. She had an easy, relaxed energy that didn't seem to change around Tommy. Most people either ignored his son completely or paid too much attention to him. Riley just treated him like any other kid. I'll get this order started for you, Riley said, then paused. She looked at Tommy, who was still arranging his sugar packets. Those colors make a nice pattern, she commented gently. The pink ones are really pretty. Tommy didn't look up, but his hands stopped moving for just a second. David held his breath. It was such a small thing, but he had learned to notice every tiny response from his son. Riley didn't push for more. She simply smiled and headed toward the kitchen. David watched her go, wondering about her story. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, but she had acted with the kind of patience that usually came from experience. The way she spoke to Tommy reminded him of his son's best therapist, the one who had taught David that sometimes the smallest gestures meant the most. While they waited for their food, David noticed Riley moving around the diner. She refilled coffee cups without being asked, chatted easily with the construction workers, and helped the mother with twins by bringing extra napkins and crayons without making a big deal about it. She seemed to notice what people needed before they even asked. When she brought their drinks over, Riley set Tommy's white ceramic mug down gently, exactly where Linda always put it. Tommy looked at the mug for a moment, then picked it up and took a small sip. Another small victory. He had accepted the change in routine without any problems. Kitchen says about 5 more minutes, Riley told David. Then, almost as an afterthought, she pulled a paper napkin from her apron. Mind if I borrow this for a second? David nodded, curious. Riley took a pen from her pocket and quickly drew something on the napkin. It wasn't fancy, just simple shapes connected by straight lines. Circles, squares, triangles, all linked together. In a repeating pattern, she set the napkin down near Tommy's elbow, not directly in front of him where it might feel intrusive. Sometimes I doodle when I'm thinking, she said casually, like it was no big deal. Tommy's eyes moved to the napkin. He studied the pattern for a long moment, his head tilting slightly to one side. Then very carefully he reached out and touched one of the triangles with his finger. David's heart started beating faster. Tommy rarely showed interest in things that other people made, especially strangers. But here he was, tracing the shapes on the napkin with his fingertip, following the lines from one shape to the next. Riley noticed too, but she didn't make a fuss about it. She just smiled and said, I like patterns too. They make sense, you know? For the next few minutes, while they waited for the food, Tommy kept looking at the napkin. He would trace the shapes, then go back to arranging his sugar packets, then look at the napkin again. David could almost see his son's mind working, finding connections between the drawn pattern and his own careful arrangements. When the food arrived, Riley had clearly given the kitchen detailed instructions. Tommy's grilled cheese was cut into perfect triangles. His fries were grouped exactly as requested and everything was arranged neatly on the plate. Tommy picked up one triangle and took a bite without any hesitation. Perfect, David said, genuinely grateful. Linda left really good notes, Riley replied, but David could tell she had gone beyond just following instructions. She had taken the time to understand what mattered to Tommy, and more importantly, she had treated those preferences with respect. As they ate, David found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't expected. Tommy was calm and focused on his food, occasionally glancing at the patterned napkin. The other diners went about their conversations, and everything felt wonderfully normal. Riley checked on them once more during the meal, asking if they needed anything else. When Tommy pointed to his empty chocolate milk mug, She brought a refill without being asked. When a piece of his grilled cheese fell onto the table, she quietly brought a damp cloth so he could clean the spot himself instead of doing it for him. These weren't big gestures, but they showed something important. Riley was paying attention. She was learning Tommy's preferences and respecting his need to do things his own way. In less than an hour, she had figured out what some people never understood, that Tommy wasn't broken or difficult. He just experienced the world differently. As they finished eating, David realized he was actually looking forward to coming back next Tuesday. Not just for the routine and the comfortable booth, but to see if this young woman would be here again. For the first time in months, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, someone else could see what he saw when he looked at his son. Not a problem to be solved, but a remarkable kid who just needed the right kind of understanding. It was their fourth Tuesday visiting the diner since Riley started working there. David had begun to notice small changes in Tommy's behavior on these days. His son seemed more relaxed getting ready in the morning, almost like he was looking forward to something. For a child who usually struggled with any change in routine, this was remarkable. Today felt different from the moment they walked in. Tommy actually looked toward their usual table instead of just following David blindly. When Riley waved from across the room, Tommy's eyes moved in her direction for just a split second before returning to his own world. But David caught it. After 8 years of watching for any sign of connection, he had learned to notice the smallest details. "Your usual spot is ready," Riley called out cheerfully as they made their way to table 7. She had saved it for them again, just like she had the past 3 weeks. The white ceramic mug was already waiting, positioned exactly where Tommy expected it to be. David settled into his seat and watched Tommy go through his familiar routine. Sugar packets in a line, napkin folded perfectly, salt and pepper shakers positioned just right. But today, Tommy kept glancing toward Riley as she moved around the diner. It was subtle. Anyone else might have missed it. But David's heart started beating a little faster. "I brought something special today," Riley said when she came over to take their order. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small notepad, different from her usual order pad. This one had pages covered in dots arranged in various patterns. "I made these during my break yesterday," she explained, setting the notepad down gently near Tommy's elbow. "They're connect the dot puzzles, but I made them myself. Thought you might like to see the patterns." Tommy's hands stopped moving. He stared at the notepad for a long moment, then carefully reached out and touched the cover. David held his breath. Tommy rarely showed interest in anything new, especially something offered by another person. Riley didn't rush or push. She simply stood there patiently while Tommy examined the notepad. After what felt like forever, Tommy opened it to the first page. The dots were arranged in a simple geometric pattern, circles connected by straight lines, just like the drawing Riley had made on the napkin during their first meeting. "You can use this pen if you want," Riley offered, placing a blue pen next to the notepad. "Or I can get you a different color. Whatever feels right." Tommy picked up the pen and held it for a moment, turning it over in his fingers. Then, very slowly, he began connecting the first 2 dots. David watched in amazement as his son carefully drew a line from one point to the next, following the pattern that Riley had created. "That's perfect," Riley said softly. "You really get how the pattern works." As Tommy continued working on the puzzle, something magical began to happen. Riley started humming, not loudly, just a gentle melody that seemed to follow the rhythm of Tommy's pen movements. It was a simple tune, rising and falling like the lines Tommy was drawing on the page. David had never heard Riley hum before. The melody was soothing and repetitive, with a pattern that matched the visual puzzle Tommy was solving. It wasn't random humming. It was purposeful, like she was creating a soundtrack for his son's careful work. Tommy paused in his drawing and lifted his head slightly. He was listening. David could see it in the way his son's shoulders relaxed, the way his breathing seemed to match the rhythm of Riley's humming. This was more engagement than David had seen from Tommy with any stranger, ever. Riley continued the gentle melody as Tommy returned to his puzzle. Line by line, dot by dot, He was creating something beautiful. But more than that, he was sharing the experience with someone else. The humming seemed to create a bridge between Riley's world and Tommy's world, a connection that didn't require words or eye contact or any of the usual ways people communicated. Other customers in the diner began to notice. The construction workers at the front table had stopped their loud conversation. The elderly couple sharing pie glanced over with curious expressions. Even Betty, the owner, emerged from the kitchen to see what was happening. Tommy finished connecting the dots on the first page, revealing a perfect star pattern. He looked at it for a moment, then turned to the next page. Riley's humming continued, adapting slightly to match the new pattern. This one more complex, with triangles and circles interweaving together. As Tommy worked on the second puzzle, something incredible happened. He began to make a sound. It started so quietly that David almost missed it, just a soft, low hum that matched Riley's melody. At first, David thought he was imagining it. Tommy had never hummed before, never made any musical sounds at all. But there it was. His son's voice, quiet but unmistakable, humming along with Riley's gentle tune. The sound was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. After 8 years of silence, Tommy was making music. Riley heard it too. David could see the surprise and joy in her eyes, but she didn't stop humming or make a big deal about what was happening. She just continued the melody, letting Tommy join in at his own pace, in his own way. The humming grew slightly stronger as Tommy became more confident. He was still focused on his puzzle, connecting dots with careful precision, but now he was also creating sound. The two activities seemed to work together, the visual pattern and the musical pattern reinforcing each other in a way that made perfect sense to Tommy's mind. David felt tears building in his eyes. He had dreamed of this moment for so long that he had almost stopped believing it would ever come. Not just sound, but intentional sound. Not just noise, but music. His son was sharing something beautiful with another person, and that person was responding with patience and understanding. The entire diner had gone quiet. Everyone could hear the gentle duet, Riley's confident humming and Tommy's tentative but growing voice joining in. But nobody stared or whispered or made Tommy feel like he was being watched. Somehow, Riley's calm energy had spread to everyone around them, creating a safe space for this miracle to unfold. Tommy finished the second puzzle and looked up at Riley. For just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3, their eyes met directly. Tommy smiled. Not his usual small, private smile, but a real smile directed at another person. A smile that said thank you, that said I understand, that said I'm happy. Beautiful work, Riley said softly, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. You've got a real talent for patterns. Tommy turned to the third page and continued working. His humming was stronger now, more confident. Riley matched his energy, letting him lead the melody while she provided a gentle harmony. Together they created something that sounded like joy. David sat in stunned silence watching his son experience connection in a way he had never seen before. This wasn't therapy or treatment or intervention. This was just two people finding a way to communicate through pattern and music and understanding. It was simple and profound and absolutely perfect. As Tommy worked through page after page of puzzles, his voice grew stronger. Other customers began to smile, caught up in the magic of the moment. A few wiped tears from their eyes. Everyone understood. They were witnessing something special. A breakthrough that had nothing to do with medicine or technology, and everything to do with one person seeing another person clearly and meeting them exactly where they were. The humming continued for nearly 20 minutes, weaving through the diner like a gentle song of hope. And for the first time in 8 years, David heard his son's voice not just making sound, but making music, making connection, making magic happen in the most ordinary place in the world. The weeks following Tommy's breakthrough felt like living in a different world. David found himself checking his phone constantly throughout the day, not for business messages, but hoping Riley had texted about how Tommy was doing during their visits. She had started spending extra time with them on Tuesdays, bringing new puzzles and humming different melodies that Tommy seemed to understand on some deep level. David couldn't stop thinking about what Riley had accomplished. teams of expensive. Specialists had worked with Tommy for years, using every technique and therapy known to science. But this young waitress had found the key in just a few weeks, simply by paying attention and treating his son like a complete person rather than a problem to solve. It was during their 6th Tuesday visit that David decided to learn more about Riley herself. As Tommy worked on a particularly complex dot-to-dot pattern she had created, David found himself really talking to her for the first time about something other than food orders. "You're incredibly good with him," David said as Riley refilled his coffee. "Do you have experience working with kids like Tommy?" Riley smiled, but there was something tired in her expression. "I'm studying special education at the community college," she said. "Well, trying to study. It's been a challenge lately." "What do you mean?" David asked, sensing there was more to the story. Riley glanced around the diner, making sure her other tables were taken care of, then sat down across from David for a moment. "I had to drop down to part-time classes this semester," she explained. "Money got tight and I needed to pick up more shifts here. My little brother Jake and I have been on our own since our parents died in a car accident 2 years ago." David felt his chest tighten. "I'm sorry. That must be incredibly difficult." "Jake's only 15, Riley continued, her voice soft but steady. "He's a good kid, really smart, but he needs someone around. I can't afford full-time tuition and still pay our rent and buy groceries. So school is taking a lot longer than I planned." David watched as Riley absently straightened the sugar packets on their table, unconsciously mimicking the careful arrangements that Tommy always made. "What's your dream?" he asked. "I mean, when you finish school, what do you want to do?" Riley's eyes lit up in a way David hadn't seen before. "I want to open a learning center," she said, her words coming faster now. "Not like the big, sterile therapy places. Something smaller, warmer, somewhere kids like Tommy can just be themselves while they learn and grow." She gestured toward Tommy, who was completely absorbed in his puzzle, humming softly as he worked. "Look at him," she said. "He's not broken. He doesn't need to be fixed. He just needs people who understand that his brain works differently, and that's actually pretty amazing." David felt something click into place in his mind. For months, he had been thinking about what to do with his success, how to use his resources for something meaningful. He had donated to charities and funded research, but it all felt distant and impersonal. Here was something real, something that could make an actual difference. "What if money wasn't an issue?" David asked carefully. "What would your perfect learning center look like?" Riley laughed, but not in a bitter way. "That's a nice dream," she said. "I've actually written it all down, detailed plans, the kind of space we'd need, the approach we'd take. I work on it during my breaks sometimes. But it's just dreaming, you know? Places like that cost millions to start up properly." "Show me," David said simply. Riley looked confused. "Show you what?" "Your plans. I'd like to see them." Riley hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "I keep notes on here," she said, scrolling through what looked like dozens of documents. "It's probably silly, but I've thought about everything. The layout, the teaching methods, even the colors for the walls." David leaned forward as Riley showed him page after page of detailed notes. She had thought about sensory-friendly lighting, quiet spaces for kids who got overwhelmed, areas designed for movement, and others for focused work. She had researched the best methods for helping children with autism, ADHD, and other learning differences. Most importantly, she had designed everything around the idea that these children were capable and valuable exactly as they were. "This is incredible," David said, and he meant it. "How long have you been working on this?" "About 3 years," Riley admitted. "Since I started college. I know it's just a fantasy, but working on the plans helps me remember why I'm studying so hard, even when it feels impossible." David made a decision that surprised even him. "Riley, can I ask you something that might sound strange?" She nodded, looking curious. "What if I told you that we could make this happen? Not someday, not eventually, but actually make it happen. Would you want to?" Riley stared at him for a long moment. "I don't understand," she said slowly. David took a deep breath. He rarely talked about his wealth with anyone, especially not in a place like this. But watching Tommy hum happily while working on Riley's puzzles, seeing the joy on his son's face, David knew this was the right thing to do. "Riley, I own a technology company," he said quietly. "A fairly successful one. What you've done for Tommy in just a few weeks, it's worth more to me than anything I've ever accomplished in business. I want to help you build this learning center, not as a charity case, but as a partner." Riley's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. "You're serious?" she whispered. "Completely serious," David said. "I've been looking for a way to use my success for something that really matters. This matters. Tommy matters. Kids like him matter. And you have something that can't be taught in any business school. You see these children for who they really are." Riley was quiet for so long that David began to worry he had overstepped. But then she looked at Tommy, who was just finishing another puzzle and starting to hum a new melody, and David saw tears forming in her eyes. "I can't believe this is real," she said softly. "It's real," David assured her. "We'll call it the Tommy Chen Learning Center. You'll be the director and head of program development. We'll build it exactly the way you've planned it, and we'll make sure every family can afford to bring their children there." Riley covered her face with her hands for a moment, overwhelmed. When she looked up, she was crying, but she was also smiling. "My brother Jake, he's been so worried about money, about whether I'll be able to finish school. He's been talking about dropping out to get a job and help pay bills. Jake can focus on being 15, David said firmly. And you can focus on building something that will help thousands of families. This isn't just about Tommy anymore, though. He'll always be the inspiration for it. This is about changing how the world sees children with differences." Tommy looked up from his puzzle at that moment, as if he had been listening to their conversation. He smiled at Riley, then at his father, then went back to his work with a contented hum. "I think he approves," Riley said, laughing through her tears. David felt lighter than he had in years. For the first time since his company had become successful, he was using his resources for something that felt truly important. Not just giving money away, but building something lasting with someone who had the vision and heart to make it work. "So," David said, extending his hand across the table. "Partners?" Riley shook his hand, her grip firm and sure. "Partners," she agreed. "This is going to change everything." And looking at his son, happily humming while creating beautiful patterns, David knew she was absolutely right. 9 months later, David stood in the main hallway of the Tommy Chen Learning Center, watching children laugh and play in ways that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. The building hummed with activity, not the overwhelming chaos that might stress sensitive kids, but the gentle buzz of children discovering their own potential. The center had opened its doors 3 months ago, and already they had a waiting list of over 200 families. Word had spread quickly through parent support groups, social media, and word of mouth. But it wasn't just the fancy equipment or beautiful spaces that drew people. It was the results they were seeing in the children. Riley emerged from one of the sensory rooms, her face glowing with the same joy David had seen that first day at the diner. She was wearing a blue polo shirt with the center's logo, a colorful pattern of connected dots that looked remarkably like the puzzles she used to draw for Tommy. "How did the morning sessions go?" David asked, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the main activity area. "Amazing," Riley said, her voice full of excitement. "Remember Lily, the girl who wouldn't speak to anyone when she started here? Today she asked me to teach her how to make the humming patterns. And Marcus, not the kid, but his dad Marcus, he told me this is the first place his son has ever wanted to come to." David smiled, watching through the large windows as children worked with trained staff members. Each room was designed based on Riley's original vision, spaces that felt warm and welcoming rather than clinical. Natural lighting, soft colors, and most importantly, adults who understood that different didn't mean broken. Tommy was in the music therapy room working with Ms. Chen, a specialist Riley had personally recruited. His vocabulary had exploded in the past months. He now used dozens of words and could even have short conversations, especially about patterns and music. But more than the words, it was his confidence that amazed David. Tommy walked taller now, smiled more, and actually seemed excited to interact with other children. "Dad, look." Tommy's voice carried through the hallway as he ran toward them, holding a piece of paper covered in musical notes. "I made a song for Riley." David's heart still skipped a beat every time he heard his son's voice. The doctors said Tommy's progress was remarkable, but David knew it had nothing to do with traditional therapy. It was about being understood, being accepted, and being given the right tools to communicate in his own way. "That's wonderful, buddy," David said, kneeling down to look at the paper. The notes were arranged in patterns that looked almost like the dot-to-dot puzzles Riley used to make. "Can you play it for me?" Tommy nodded enthusiastically and ran back toward the music room. Riley watched him go with obvious affection. "He's not the same kid who used to sit quietly in that diner booth," she said softly. "None of us are the same," David replied, and he meant it. The past year had changed him more than the previous decade of business success. He still ran his company, but now he had a purpose that felt bigger than profit margins and market share. They walked past the art therapy room where a teenage girl with Down syndrome was painting a mural with help from 2 other students. In me. The next room, a boy with ADHD was working on a puzzle with an occupational therapist. His restless energy channeled into focused problem solving. "The Martinez family wants to meet with you next week," Riley said, checking her tablet. "Their daughter Elena has been here for 2 months now, and they want to make a donation to help other families." This had become a pattern. Families who could afford to pay the full fees often contributed extra to help cover costs for families who couldn't. David had made sure the center operated on a sliding scale. No child was turned away because of money, but those who could pay helped support those who couldn't. "Speaking of donations," David said, "I got a call from Dr. Peterson at Children's Hospital. They want to partner with us to create a similar center in Chicago." Riley stopped walking and stared at him. "Seriously? 3 other cities have reached out too," David continued. "Boston, Denver, and Portland. Apparently word is spreading about what we're doing here." Riley leaned against the wall, looking overwhelmed. "I never imagined it would grow this fast." "I did," David said honestly. "What you created here isn't just a school or a therapy center. It's a completely different way of thinking about children with differences. Of course, other places want to copy it. They had been featured in several magazines and news programs over the past few months. Parents from across the country were calling, asking how to start similar centers in their own communities. Riley had been invited to speak at education conferences, something that would have been unimaginable when she was working double shifts at the diner to pay for college. "Remember when you showed me those plans on your phone?" David asked. "You had enough ideas for 10 centers, not just 1. Riley laughed. "I was just dreaming big. I never thought anyone would actually want to make it happen." "Well, I hope you're ready to dream even bigger," David said, "because I think we're just getting started." They reached the main lobby, where David's favorite part of the center was located. On the wall hung a large framed photograph from that day at the diner when Tommy first hummed along with Riley. Betty, the diner owner, had captured the moment on her phone without them knowing. In the picture, Tommy was bent over his puzzle, completely absorbed while Riley hummed beside him. Both their faces showed pure concentration and joy. Below the photograph was a small plaque that read, "It all started with patience, understanding, and a simple pattern of dots." Parents often stopped to read the plaque when they visited. Many of them had similar stories, moments when their child surprised everyone by connecting in an unexpected way. The center had become more than just a place for learning. It had become a symbol of hope for families who had been told their children might never reach their potential. "Riley, David, you need to see this," called Alex, one of their newest staff members. He was holding his phone, practically bouncing with excitement. "What is it?" Riley asked. "Remember that video the local news station did about Tommy's progress? Someone shared it online and it's gone viral. Over 2 million views in the past week." David and Riley looked at each other in amazement. The video showed Tommy at the center, confidently explaining his latest musical pattern to a group of other children. His transformation from the silent boy in the diner to this articulate, confident young person was undeniable. Look at some of these comments, Alex continued, scrolling through his phone. Parents from all over the world are sharing their own stories. There's a mom in Australia who says she's starting a similar program there. A dad in Germany is asking for our curriculum guides. Riley sank into one of the lobby chairs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had created. I can't believe this all started because I doodled some patterns on a napkin. David sat beside her. It started because you saw Tommy as a complete person, not a collection of problems to fix. That's something you can't teach, Riley. But you can inspire other people to look at children the same way. Through the window, they could see children playing on the specially designed playground. Some were alone, absorbed in their own activities. Others were playing together in small groups. All of them looked happy and accepted for exactly who they were. So what do you think? David asked. Ready to change the world? Riley stood up, her eyes bright with determination. Let's do it, she said. Every child deserves to be understood. As they walked back toward the classrooms, David felt grateful for that ordinary Tuesday when everything changed. Sometimes the most important moments happen in the most unexpected places with the simplest gestures, creating ripples that spread far beyond anything you could have imagined.